Hello, everyone. Hi, Georgia. Thanks for joining us.
Hello.
Good morning.
So we were all in London in the same room just 2 days ago, and here we are on a recording of the CDR Policy Scoop because a lot of stuff has happened since we met. So thank you for finding time on short notice to talk to us about what's been happening in the UK.
No problem. It's fantastic to be part of this, actually. And as you say, a huge week for GGRs. I think if you told me at the beginning of this week how much was going to happen in the GGR world, I'm not sure I would have believed you, but here we are.
Excellent. Where should we start? I think what would be helpful for the average person, in which I count myself in here, is a bit of context of what this review, where does it stand in the whole parliamentary process? Because we know there's been a review by an MP, I believe. What does it mean?
Yes, absolutely. So the way that the UK government tends to approach some really sticky, thorny issues is they will commission an independent review where they bring together sector experts to produce a kind of neutral, well-informed assessment of the best way forward. And with the GGR review, I think it came about. I don't actually know in real detail how it came about. My understanding is that there was a recognition that this is a really complex area, potentially quite expensive. Therefore, it needs to be thought through in detail. And the current government, the Labour government, commissioned the review from somebody called Dr Alan Whitehead, who is enormously experienced in the energy sector in the UK. He's been involved in politics for a long time. He was a former MP, but he's no longer an MP. And he was given a tight timeline. So I think it was commissioned in February and now we're October,
Wow.
which is pretty impressive for
That's
UK
incredible.
reviews. Absolutely. And he set about pulling together a team, and it is so it's chaired by Alan, but he works in very close collaboration with the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero. So it is absolutely with government input, access to government data, but then they bring in, as I say, sector experts throughout the review, and they have published it or their responses this week. And all I would say, just to finish on that, is in terms of the government response to the review, they are required to produce a formal response. So one way or another, we know that we will have obviously recognition and then follow up from the government, but they are not required to implement any of the recommendations. They are, as they say, recommendations.
So I was really looking forward to this report as soon as I heard about it, that it was coming. And I saw that online in some reactions, this report was kind of referred to as one of probably the most important report on carbon removal of this year. I'm very impressed to see that there is such a process in the UK, because that's not, I think, common in other governments, definitely not in those where I've been closely involved. I think there's something there to learn for them. So one thing that's kind of surprised me when I was going through the report is the fact that this report divides removals into 3 categories. We have geologically permanent removals that include dark specs and enhanced weathering. Then we have long-term carbon storage removals, which includes afforestation, forest management, and biochar. And then we have non-permanent ones, and that's carbon storage, soil carbon storage, peatlands, and so on. So, there are these 3 categories, and there is, of course, the introduction of the concept of geological net zero. And in this context, specifically, only permanent carbon removals are seen as those that should be included in the UK ETS, and also, for example, would be available for the aviation sector. So I'd be really curious to hear your feedback on it. I mean, from Sebastian, obviously, the fact that biochar is out of that scope. So I'm curious, what do you think about it? But it's also different, if you think about it, compared to how the EU is approaching it in its CRCF.
Thanks, Eva. That's a really good question. And I have to admit, this was an area where I was slightly surprised, primarily because my understanding of the carbon removal and carbon farming regulation is that biochar is classified as a permanent carbon removal storage, not a long-term storage, or not classified as long-term storage. And I've also not seen previously biochar being lumped together with afforestation. I would see these as really distinct pathways. So I'd like to dig in a little bit more to the review team's position on this and understand where they're coming from. Also, I think the UK government is currently planning to roll out a BSI standard for biochar. I may have that wrong, but hopefully they are, and looking to align to the best of their abilities with CRCF methodologies. So I think this is one that merits some further digging.
And I thought there was some, and you actually shared with me some information just 2 days ago about this potential alignment with the CRCF picking up pace. And speaking to policymakers as well in the UK, what's pretty obvious is that when the work started years ago on GGRs, the CRCF wasn't there, right? There wasn't anything to piggyback from. And now there is. And so there's a recognition that they might have to act differently now than they did 2 or 3 years ago. I think on biochar, it's actually really interesting what's in this report for me. A couple of things. One is it puts the TRL at 8 to 9, higher than pretty much anything else. I thought that the price estimations were much more realistic and actually higher than I've ever seen from any European report. So they're talking about 250, 300 pounds a ton. But I also thought it was, and this is verbatim, they say that biochar is a case study in outdated regulation in the UK. Because they essentially highlight how biochar is classified a waste and how that's just one of the first recommendations, basically, that should be changed because otherwise there will be no biochar in the UK. But yeah, super keen to see what happens once they start doing that alignment with the CRCF.
Yeah, and I think that's a really key point. So just to jump in on the regulation point and where areas of UK regulation are just presenting very clear barriers to CDR pathway rollout, and they've honed in on biochar as a specific one, partly off the back of excellent work done by the CO2RE or the core organisation, which identifies the restriction around how much biochar you can spread. I think it's 1 ton per hectare in the UK versus no limits in other countries. So I'd say it's a real asset of this report that they've said, up front and centre, here are some low-hanging fruit, some regulatory barriers that we could undo pretty swiftly to support these pathways.
One thing that really stood out to me, they put the TRL of ERW at 8 at times 9. That, again, I thought was shocking because whenever I've worked a lot on introducing enhanced weathering in European policy. I co-founded the Enhanced Weathering Alliance. I'm a big fan of enhanced weathering, but I've never seen it higher than 6. So I was very surprised when I saw that.
I guess there are also many ways of doing it. So it depends on what exact application you're looking at, right?
Yeah, but still, they seem to have a lot of confidence, basically, in enhanced weathering. That's I think what we get from this.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and I would look to does their reference come from core, from the core work?
Yes, it does.
Yes, it does. Yeah. Core has done a lot of work on ERW, so it'd be really interesting to dig into that. But I think they do also point out that there are still considerable MRV challenges. But I would agree. I'd say that's a confident approach.
One thing that I also want to talk about is there's a lot of emphasis on biomass. And there's a lot of emphasis on not importing biomass, which for me was a clear, hint at one big company in the UK. So that was interesting for me. And they said that domestic biomass should be prioritized. And then they also say that basically because of that, they actually think that biochar has a much better shot because it can utilize biomass that essentially is not as available for BECCS and bio-CCS and waste-to-energy use cases. So yeah, I'm wondering, Georgia, if you have probably much more contextual knowledge about biomass, which is clearly a hot topic. So yeah, what do you know about everything around what we see in this report?
Do you know, I had a feeling you might ask me about biomass this morning. So I think, I mean, yes, top level, obviously, there have been real challenges around the sustainability implications of importing biomass. So I think there's a real concern and a desire to tackle that head on so that we don't undermine credibility in the sector overall. In terms of biomass, ultimately, this is really coming from, where we stand right now. We import the majority of our biomass. We don't use domestic sources sufficiently well, and a desire to maximize the potential of predominantly waste sources for all CDR pathways. And I mean, where I am not an expert, but I'd love to understand more, is where are the limitations around that and the cost implications of using these different sources of biomass. But really, there is a considerable focus on what can we do with waste? How can we use this through all these different pathways? And they refer to other processes as well, ranging from anaerobic digestion and onwards, to say, let's make as much use of this as possible. So I think that's the motivation here, is let's get away where as much as we can from importing biomass, and let's be innovative in our approach to using domestic waste sources or biomass sources.
Super interesting.
So I'd like to explore the recommendation to establish an office for GGRs, because it's a challenge that many other countries will be facing. Removals are such a broad ecosystem of different solutions that they are bound to be tackled by different parts of the government, different government agencies, and so on. What do you think? It's obviously challenging to coordinate between different ministries or government entities, and it's the same everywhere. Coordination, you never hear that in one or another country, like, these two ministries really coordinate well. Like, anytime you hear about it, is like, it's hard. Or even if it's the European Commission, right? Like, within the Commission, coordinating between different services there. I mean, would this solve it all? What do you think? How likely it is that something that this could actually be implemented in practice?
It's a really good question. First off, what I'd say is it's actually not a new idea. It's one that has been kicking around in the UK for a while. I think it was Green Alliance that originally came up with this, and it was named an Office for Carbon. And obviously it's evolved now, and the idea is an office for GGRs. And it emerged from exactly that challenge, as you say, that one party doesn't speak to the other party, but you need both of them involved to make things happen. And firstly, I think ultimately where they're coming from is somebody needs to have overriding responsibility, and somebody needs to have visibility of all the different component parts that are required. And biochar is a great example here, because waste all comes under DEFRA, or whereas removals come under DESNES. So how do you ensure that there's that collaboration and both departments are working speedily to unlock these pathways? So I think the motivation makes enormous sense. Whether it will happen in practice and whether we can achieve this is another question. I mean, firstly, obviously, setting up a whole new office is very expensive generally, just from a sheer kind of government angle. There's a lot of costs involved. And some might take the view that this is going to add to general admin, workflow, etc. My view is that if we can achieve this, it would be a very strong signal. And it could play a really, really critical role in speeding up this sector, because I think it has struggled from lack of communication, lack of understanding between different departments. There are critical departments, and it could help bring them all together. And also just position CDR and tackling carbon and monitoring carbon at the center of government focus. But it's there is possibly some cheat-ish ways of doing it. So you could, for example, make it an extension of the CCC, just as an idea, if you felt that you couldn't develop and produce, sort of put together a whole new office. There might be some ways around it, but ultimately I think it'd be a good thing.
One thing that I discussed with you at Carbon Unbound, but also discussed with a couple of DESNs. How do you spell the acronym quickly?
DESNZ, DESNES.
DESNES, that's it, DESNES. With a couple of DESNES folks is the international dimension. And 2 days ago, what I heard was basically off the table until further notice. I think the further notice has arrived, right? Like now, it's one of the recommendations is that the UK should reconsider its stance on international credits, which is very much in line with what we're seeing happening in Europe. And it even goes as far as saying that the UK should lead on international GGR, essentially, treaties and so on. So this was super interesting for me. What's your take on this? And again, maybe thinking a little bit ahead, do you think this is something that in the response from the government could land well? Or do you think, where do you see it?
Yeah, I also thought that was a fantastic recommendation. I mean, I am projecting here slightly, but I have a hunch that both at EU level and UK level, there was always a bit of an open door internally to needing to source CDR or GGR CDR from other locations where it may be more cost effective. But generally the external position needing to be quite rigid, both in terms of, or for a number of reasons, from taking responsibility through to ensuring that UK taxpayer money is going to be going towards UK growth opportunities to incentivize investment domestically, etc. So I think I completely understand both the EU and the UK positions, but I think it's really exciting to see those evolve and the door to open, because ultimately I think there's a huge amount the UK can play in this or do in this space, and a big role they can play. Whether we will be able to source all of our removal requirements domestically at a cost, in a cost-effective way, is another question. And so we really should consider that, being open-minded. And I know, Sebastian, you and I talked about, for example, the sheer scale and opportunity of biochar in Bolivia, which, it's very, very interesting. DAX in, locations where you have geothermal power, etc. I think we need to keep an open mind. And there are, broader co-benefits to having an international strategy. So I think this is a great recommendation. And I hope that it is picked up.
So, Georgia, what I would like to ask you is, like, with all the background that you have and the expectations that you might have when, opening up this file for the first time, was there anything in there that either surprised you, or also was there anything that you felt still is missing? Because it's a very, very comprehensive report, but there might have been expectations for something else. But I have to say, I do love the fact that this report is so specific in its recommendations. Usually, when someone is kind of, we just hear either that's either something is not good enough, let's say policies are not good enough, or we hear that policies are not good enough, and then we get some very general, that things should be done. But here we get very specific guidance on what should be done. I love that. But I'd love to get your take on what stood out.
Absolutely. So I would say up front, I was, really, really thrilled with this report. I thought it would be good because Dr. Alan Whitehead's excellent. He has there is a fantastic team in DESNES, and I know that others have mentioned this before, but a really knowledgeable civil service working on this area. So I thought it would be good, and they did. They scheduled a lot of audiences with the broader sector. They read all the reports out there. I know they really put a huge amount of effort into it, but I would say it has exceeded expectations, and I think everyone I've spoken to in the last 24 hours agrees with that, mostly because it's bold. I think that's kind of, I'd say, takeaway number one. In the current fiscal climate, in the current political climate, I thought some of the recommendations would be much more watered down just from an acceptability angle, but this is bold. I also think that what stands out is, and this is a consequence of the really excellent academic community in the UK that has supported this. So, for example, the State of CDR report that came out earlier this year, I think that was fundamental to the review and them understanding the lay of the land through technologies to opportunities, who's doing what in this space. So I think that's a key factor. In terms of other surprises or any surprises, I think, everything in there, to be fair, are things that we've heard discussed, or we've also sort of put in our own recommendations and align with that. But it's probably the SAF mandate is the most exciting that's been picked up, because that is the UK looking to lead, suggesting something really quite, as I say, quite different from where other countries might be at, that we think could play a critical role, be a big lever. That's probably the big one that stands out, I would say, overall.
Yeah, I love that reframing from SAF mandate to Net Zero Aviation Mandate. And I know that's something that Robert Höglund is a big fan of, and we're going to have him on the show on Monday to talk about it. So we're going to do a deep dive on SAF, CDR, UK on Monday. But yeah, that was a big one. One thing that also surprised me that goes straight against what I recently saw from the government was how they spoke about woodlands in the ETS. Right, because that's something that from European side was quite surprising when we saw that kind of woodlands were suggested for inclusion in the ETS, and now they say we need to fund this. We can even fund it with ETS revenue, but we shouldn't directly integrate woodlands into the ETS for the same rationale that Eva explained earlier. Right, net zero, geological net zero. So I thought that was really interesting too. Quite a bold stance, essentially.
Yes, that's a really good point. I think, the sort of CDR GGR world is so divided on this one that I'm not surprised they've landed where they've landed, because given the CCC recommendation, that's why that was not a surprise to me, that's the route that this review has gone down, even though it might seem a little distinct to the current DESNZ position. I think that they've ultimately landed in a great place with some suggestions of the route forward. What I would say, though, is hypothecation of UK ETS revenues. That's kind of the holy grail from a decarbonisation investment perspective. Most of us working in this space would love that model to be replicated from the EU. But as I'm sure you are well aware, hypothecation is not a UK Treasury favourite. But I think ultimately where they land is, however it is funded, is a clear recognition that there needs to just simply be more support for trees, more government funding for trees one way or another. And we can't really dodge that. We've just got to make sure that happens.
So we have the government policy at the state where it is today, and now we have these very extensive reports. How likely do you think these recommendations are to be taken on? Or which ones are more likely, which ones less likely? What's your take?
So I think something that is very exciting is the people who've been involved in this report are involved in delivering our CDR policy. So, for example, David Joffe, who led it from inside DESNZ, he is a critical leader within DESNZ. He works very closely with senior leadership. So in terms of the civil service and policymakers, you've got a lot of the most, really, really important people on board who obviously sort of understand and back these proposals, and also, but really above all, comprehend the rationale for them. So I think that's a very good sign. Everything that is linked to cost efficiency and co-benefits, for example, with other industries and other industrial decarbonisation targets, I think will be taken very, very seriously, because of course that's what we are looking to achieve. The government is in a, UK is fiscally constrained, so I think those would jump to the top of the list of where are these efficiencies going to come from. Growth will be also those that are linked to domestic growth, I think will go high up the agenda as well, because that is a top priority for this government. And that might mean support for the international collaboration, because of looking at ultimately growth for UK companies, growth for UK PLC. So I think we should very much look at those recommendations and think that there's a good chance they'll be implemented. I think the Office for GGRs, I think we'd all like to get there. I'm realistic about government putting in place new offices, so that may not, but let's see. And the SAF change, I think that could get there too. It's bold, but it could get there. I mean, one that I'd like to call out, and we would really like to work on more, and that we provided some evidence for the review on, is our sort of predictions and calculations that we've kept done at the GFI show that the costs of BECCS and DACs are very unlikely to have come down much between now and 2030 with the current policy regime. So we need to do more. And we, along with a group of NGOs, we recommended a sandbox between now and 2030, which is a government-backed sort of testing and trialing scheme, where you can see how the private sector responds to, for example, purchasing GGR allowances and at different prices. And I think doing that testing and trialing sooner rather than later would be really valuable, because otherwise we're going to get to 2029 and start testing at that point. That'll push us out to 2031. We lose critical time. So that is I think the recommendation is not specifically for a sandbox, but it is to address policy levers between now and UK ETS integration. And I'm very hopeful that will get through as well.
Excellent. I know we're basically up on time, but just quick answer. When is there a timeline for when the government has to respond?
No official timeline. No. Unfortunately not. I mean, the next thing we're going to see is the carbon budget delivery plan that will come out. I think it's very soon, the 29th of October. But no, I mean, one thing to look out for, Keir Starmer is going to COP30. We have now got CDR 30. That's really exciting at COP30. He will most likely want to be able to make as many announcements as possible as any prime minister would. So I think he will be looking to recent reviews, to recommendations. So we might see some things fast tracked, but no, there is no official timeline for response.
Okay, excellent. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Georgia.
Yeah,
this was fascinating and very hopeful. And again, congratulations to the whole team who led this review and the team at DESNZ, who are doing a terrific job. And yeah, very exciting times. We might have to have you on very soon from what you just said.
So, thank you both very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.